I just resumed recording on Zoom. And for now, let's record it on Zoom, and then we'll decide if we want to push it up when we're done. Sometimes we also push it through live on YouTube, or we can pull it up after the fact and put it on, which we've done it both ways. So the nice thing about doing it on Zoom is it generates a transcript for you.
That's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. So this is supposed to be one of our open topic nights. In general, we sort of push the Resurrecting Civility project forward a couple of nights a week, and then we have an open topic in the middle. They're all of the same spirit, really, right? Trying to discuss, trying to model in a certain way, to model, apply, etc. Various things that we're talking about at a more theoretical level in the practice of civil conversation. So I think we've been doing pretty well at that. Of course, we haven't gone after particularly challenging topics and invited particularly audiences or other participants who might be in greater levels of disagreement with us or with any of us than we are with one another. I think that's fair to say. So JP or John, have you guys been thinking in general this would be an open topic we'd talk about, and we can do anything we want tonight, but if you had something you were chewing on and we're thinking we'd get,
I don't have anything huge, but I listened to a podcast today on basically corona or vaccine conspiracies. And I've kind of been, there's kind of just a lot of conspiracies about a lot of things going on right now. QAnon is another one that is gaining some traction, which is another pretty wild conspiracy theory that has a lot of claims. But so I heard that what was so striking about the one I listened to today was I was under the impression, I think the last statistic I heard was that 1 in 6 Americans were skeptical at some degree about vaccines, which seemed pretty high to me. And then this thing today that I was listening to said that 50% of Americans were skeptical of the coronavirus vaccine. So that was...
What was that number for skeptical of the coronavirus vaccine?
50% of Americans. Which sounds outrageous to me almost, but so yeah, that was interesting. They go in a little bit more about the history of vaccine skepticism and how it really does cut across all social, racial, socioeconomic classes. There's just a lot of different factors that each kind of have their own reasons for doubting it. And then throw on top of this a vaccine that is getting developed so much faster than anyone is ever used to. Like, vaccines typically take 10 times longer than this. And they're saying they can come up with a safe vaccine and this quickly. And then kind of just the lack of, or the growing mistrust of other people, and you throw all these things in together, and that's where they think this 50% number comes from.
Wow. I wonder whether they made the distinction between what kind of various kinds of skepticism about the vaccine. So one could be rightly skeptical about the flu vaccine when you find out what it actually does, which is far from protect. Almost no vaccines protect everybody, actually, turns out, but some will protect a great many people who get it up in the 90s somewhere. I just happened to hear this. I don't know whether it's true or not, but I heard a news clip today that said for measles, it's in the 90s, but for the flu, it's under 50%, and I think it might be closer to 30% or something like that. In other words, all it does is knock out the probability, it dampens the probability that you'll get the particular flu. But Lisa takes care of people who have the very flu for which they have been vaccinated all the time.
Yeah.
67% effective rate on flu vaccines.
Say that again, Joe.
67% effective rate.
Is that over time? Because I know some
Yeah.
years they have a particularly effective one, and some years they have a particularly ineffective one.
Nice.
Yeah, this is over time.
Because I know this past flu season, so right before COVID hit, I was seeing a lot of studies that they had a particularly ineffective flu vaccine for that year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a kind of cause for skepticism. Skepticism about how much good it's going to do us. Is it going to actually is it going to drive COVID away? Or are we going to be living under COVID in one form or another for a really long time?
Yeah, so they did not get, I don't think they got into, which I agree is super important to know. I assume they combined a couple of different levels of skepticism to get that 50% number. But I don't know exactly what those different questions were.
Yeah, it's a big deal because, what was it? It's pretty important for everyone to get the vaccine, right? For the vaccine to be effective.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to the measles vaccine. I think it was either measles or polio, but there were particular regions of the world where people decided not to take the vaccine. Like particular imams were like, this is a Western conspiracy to try and control our minds. And then basically either measles or polio was able to spread back through that community and then via that community into other communities again. And so it's a little bit of I mean, all or nothing isn't quite the right word.
I may be wrong, but I thought I heard Dr. Fauci say 75% or something. So pretty high. People need to get the vaccine
Right.
for us to have immunity or good immunity.
Right.
So it's pretty high.
It'd be a big problem if that got politicized like masks did, you know,
Right.
for that reason.
So again, I think there's some useful distinctions here. The number the percentage that you need to get of the percentage of the population that needs to be vaccinated for an effective vaccine regimen will depend on some things. It will depend upon the transmission rate of the virus among unvaccinated people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it could be that, I mean, if it's if it's super, if it jumps very easily from person to person, then you would think you'd need to vaccinate a higher percentage of the population in order to keep it from jumping out. And there's also the question of how bad is it if you do get it? What's the mortality rate? So if it's Ebola, which has a greater than 50% mortality rate, I think, which is, by the way, better than a lot of people think, but it's still pretty bad. I mean, you remember when people started getting sick in the United States and they started living. A bunch of people, when it did jump this last time to the United States in a few cases. Anyway, that seemed like news to people, but it's around 50%, I think. Then that also depends upon 50% where. What's the mortality rate? Who are the populations that are getting sick, right? And what are the comorbidities and all of those sorts of things? And what's the healthcare system that's around to help them? All those things are relevant. So anyway,
I actually saw a really interesting chart that mapped different diseases and things that had qualified as pandemics in the past, that maps the mortality rate with the transmissibility rate and shows certain different diseases that where they mapped, like were they super transmissible but not super high mortality rates, like kind of in the vein of COVID, or diseases that have a lot higher mortality rate but a much smaller transmissibility, such as Ebola. Just super interesting. If you haven't seen one of those yet, I would check it out.
It's fun. I haven't seen that chart. I do remember reading that the rotavirus, if I got the name of it right, is so transmissible that a simple 6 viral particles is sufficient to infect. The viral burden that they sometimes talk about that you need to take on before your system gets hammered is 6 particles. So it's unbelievably transmissive. And they've done studies where, for example, it's on the surface of a table at a diner in one famous study, and 100% of the people that sit there get sick. If you sit at that table and it was not cleaned, every single person until it's clean gets sick. But that's just a flu. That's just a light flu, and it doesn't kill that many people unless there are other comorbidities. Whereas Ebola, for example, is on that chart has got to be less transmissible because it tends to kill you before you get a chance to transmit it very far, right? And everyone runs away from you because you're heaving and, writhing in pain on the ground, and terrible things are happening to you. So yeah, the coronavirus is somewhere in the middle, right? It's not as, it's pretty transmissible and it's pretty lethal, but it isn't, it's not at the extremes of either of those. So I don't know. I haven't heard, has anybody heard what percentage of this virus in the modern age, what percentage of a vaccine? Well, even then, there's what percentage of what efficacy of what vaccine, right? The more efficacious it is, the more efficacious the vaccine at knocking it, the more it actually charges you up and keeps you from getting it, right? Let me get this right, sorry. Now I've lost my train of thought. Maybe somebody else can pick it up. There are 2 factors in there I was trying to get at, and I've lost focus of them. You understand coronavirus? Go ahead.
How good it is at stopping it if you do get it and you have a vaccine.
That's right.
And then if it's like the flu, also another thing similar to that, if it's like the flu and there's multiple strains, how effective are we going to be at picking up the most important strain for each season or whatever?
That's good. So, and that's one of the factors that builds into that overall efficacy, right? Per average dose, how many people are immunized. But then there's the question of the other number I was looking for is how many people need to get it for an effective policy. So you need both of those.
The Mayo Clinic says 70%.
Yeah, the 70 to, or I thought the 75% I heard was from Dr. Fauci was referring to this one.
So he's presuming probably that it works kind of like other coronavirus type vaccinations work. I don't know what that efficacy is, but they do have some analogies with other. Yeah, we've seen these guys before. SARS, for example, is one, right?
Yeah. Did we develop a vaccine for SARS?
Something tells me it might have been developed, but not widely delivered because they might have chased it out without the vaccine. But I don't remember.
How did it end? I either wasn't alive or was barely alive at that point. How did the SARS outbreak end?
Yeah. I don't remember that plainly, but I'll tell you what my impression is, but I no longer remember the source of my impression. It's that indistinct. So my impression is that we chased it out through public health measures, and that did not include a vaccine. We chased it out otherwise. And I think they did develop a vaccine, maybe, but didn't distribute it widely because they already had gotten on top of it. And there too, it would matter how, you know, you don't give a vaccine out willy-nilly. How much good is it going to do you? How much harm is it going to do? What are the side effects? Or, you know, how long has it been studied, et cetera? What's the chances of actually inducing the disease rather than protecting for it? Some vaccines will do that in some people. That's a particularly nasty side effect, is give you the disease. It's trying to, they all give you the disease in some way. Some of them give you the disease in such a way that some percentage of the people don't get over it. They get hammered by it.
It says there's currently no vaccine for SARS.
Okay.
So.
Wrong disease then, I'm thinking of.
Yeah. I also had thought this to be true, but wanted to double check before I said anything. It seems like SARS just kind of went away.
Yeah.
Just disappeared. The weather got warm and all of a sudden it just disappeared.
The sun got it.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it kind of could have, I mean, it obviously didn't make it go away, but the summer is supposed to be helping a little bit, because I think it makes it stay on surfaces for a shorter period of time, the coronavirus, that is, if it's hot. So it does, that is the way it is helping a little bit. But obviously not enough.
I mean, I will say it seems like the number of new cases has slowed down more than we expected.
I thought we had, like, am I thinking of it?
We only had, I think, 70,000 or 65,000 new cases today.
Yeah.
Didn't we have a bunch of days in a row where it went up every day?
Right. It was going up really fast the last couple weeks, and people were like, we're going to be well over 100,000 in short order. And today I was looking at it, and it was like 5,000 or 6,000 less than the last time I had looked at it. And I was surprised to see that. So maybe things are slowing down more than maybe people expected.
Yeah, I wish
so
we
maybe that is a testament to the summer doing something.
Or I also wish we had a measure. Has anyone heard of one? It'd be nice if there was some measure of overall public health intervention. So, you know, all the various strategies multiplied through by some weighting factor for each one, multiplied through by, you know, how many people are under those regimes now, right? Those various protective regimes. And you'd have to do a lot of sampling, but I could imagine you could measure that. But I haven't seen a measure of it in public. Has anybody?
No.
I haven't seen a measure.
No. The state of Washington must have some kind of measure for, I mean, it's not the state of Washington, but it's a University of Washington, I think, isn't it? That's got a number of them, but a number of universities, labs, et cetera, have got models for projecting. The one that ran through the White House for a while when the news was good came out of the University of Washington, I think. And that one, it makes predictions under certain sets of circumstances, and they just had a threefold distinction. Everything from 95% of the population wearing masks or something like that, all the way through in the middle, some protective social distancing, all the way out to no protective social distancing. And they do put numbers, and they make projections based on those. So they must be quantifying those protective strategies in some way.
Are they quantifying the protective strategies, or are they quantifying the rate for now, given the protective strategies we have, extrapolating that to if things stay the way they are, this is what will unfold over time?
I think I got that question, Rachel, although you broke up.
Yeah, broke up
For the first time, by the way. Okay. I thought the question might have been, what is it exactly are they quantifying? How many people are going to get sick and die versus how many people are under what protective measures? And they're certainly quantifying how many people are likely to get sick and die, but I don't see how they do that without quantifying, without putting into numbers, some rough numbers, those protective measure distinctions that I just described in qualitative terms. They've got to quantify it.
I guess the question I'm asking is, rather than like quantifying a score, like let's say out of 100 of the combination of COVID response things that are happening, like rather than quantifying that, my question is if those projections might, and again, the scientist, if those projections might be coming from looking at current rate of spread, given current public health initiatives that are in place, and extrapolating that over time to see what they think the future will look like, given what the now looks like.
No, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
So I
mean, I think it'd be great if they had like a score out of 100, like if somebody wants to like rank all the countries, all the states on like how effective their policy is. That'd be awesome, like a great resource to be able to look at and compare and contrast.
Right.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Sort of a dashboard where you could look at your state's public health strategy.
I mean, this is not super comparable. The New York Times has a really comprehensive interactive map where you can look at like state by state hotspots. You can look at mortality rate. So like I've been kind of keeping an eye on there just because it's a good visual representation that I've been using.
Yeah.
Nice. If you or anybody has anything in front of them that they want to share in that regard, you can actually, let me do this. I just stopped sharing, and I think you can all now share if you choose to. You share your screen.
Yeah. Let's see. Is this, let's see, how do I do this? Share my screen. Oh, psych.
You know, if it tells you, you should be able to see a button, but sometimes you can see a button, but it argues with you and says the host has got to give you permission. And I forget what settings you're on here. I think I can give you permission.
Well, the problem is the New York Times is forcing me to sign in on this laptop, and I don't have my sign-in information.
I can pull it up. I have a New York Times account, and I'm logged in on this device.
Yeah, do it.
Is there anything in particular you wanted to see?
Well, I was just going to, I mean, if you guys looked at, I just wanted to show them are you talking about just the coronavirus in the U.S. live updates section of the New York Times?
Let me share what I have been looking at, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
All right. Are you seeing my screen?
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this first thing now, right in the middle, this is the U.S.'s data of new cases by day. So JP, what you were saying before about how it had been going up, and then if you look at the last couple on the end, you can see that it goes down a little bit. So that's good news. I know the dark red line looks like it's continuing to go up, but if you look at the like darker red blocks, they do go down, but it looks like today they went back up, which is why that slope is kind of looking the way that it does. what I personally have been using is, where
Dark line is a 7-day weighted average. Yeah, it is. I can read it now.
yeah, if you go state by state, let's pull up Connecticut.
By the way, while you're doing this, do we know whether the data reporting has actually shifted from the CDC through HHS?
That's a great question.
That was going to happen. It was announced that it was going to happen, but I didn't pay attention as to whether it's happened yet or not, or if it's still on. I haven't heard anything other than that it was on. That was what was going to happen. And dimly recall was supposed to happen soon. I don't mean to be suggesting that there's anything shady going on here, but I do think it's
totally. I mean, a database of information is only as good as the inputs it's getting. That's definitely something I can continue to look on, especially as they start to make that switch. But the thing that I've mainly, like when I'm kind of looking around this website, I've been looking at the hot spots to like see on trends of like, okay, this has happened over the last like 5 months of this pandemic, but like what are the facts on the ground now? Like, are things booming? Are things going down?
Nice.
So this like hot spot monitor, like Connecticut's been doing pretty well, but I look for either a like horizontal line or a down.
Sweet, I hadn't seen that one. That's very nice. I love that little trend indicator around each cluster of counties there.
Yeah, totally. Connecticut, a smaller county, so you can't see the. Is there a state you'd like to check out just for comparison?
Actually, yeah. Check Arizona.
Yeah.
Because I did happen to hear the president mention today that Arizona is getting better.
So if you look at this chart that shows the new cases, it does show like on trend as opposed to like early July. The 7-day trend is going down a little bit, albeit not what it was in May. But let's check out hotspots. So we've got a little more of a peppered map here.
Mm.
Why? I'm not sure why they are not showing up in their full county, why the colors are looking weirder. I haven't seen that yet. But
you pull on the large hot one in the middle, that's Maricopa County, maybe, is it?
In here?
Yeah, I'm looking for Maricopa County. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, yes, Maricopa County. Yeah, so they've been about the same, but relatively.
That really surprises me. But
yeah.
That's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing.
But total cases, I like that it shows the percentage of people who have had it. So in Maricopa County, 1 in 45 people have had it.
Mm.
That's not like over the last 2 weeks, that's over like the course of the pandemic.
Is that a measured number? We'll have to get to the bottom, because just today they talked about a CDC report suggesting that the measured numbers of COVID cases is 1/10 of the.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that would have to be, I mean, they can't report it if they don't have the data.
So it's a measured
that's
number.
That's got to be, yeah.
Projected number.
Okay.
Cool.
But yeah, I like that resource for trolling around, and just, it's a good visual look at kind of what's going on. That's what I personally have been using to check out how things are.
It'd be interesting to see based on where you're going, like how many people in the area in the last 14 days have had it. Like it had that 1 in 45 number on that last screen. Like, yeah. So like if you're in a particular place, what's the likelihood that a person in this space has coronavirus? Right.
I think Michael might have had to do some type of that for getting leave to come out for Krista's wedding.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly how he did it, but
I mean, I definitely had that thought on the plane flying out here from Oregon.
mm-hmm.
Like, so the middle seats were open. I was flying Southwest, so I appreciated having the middle seats open for sure. But that's still a couple hundred people probably. So what's the likelihood that at least one or two people had it? You know?
Yeah.
That would just be an interesting number to have.
The other piece of the puzzle is like, where are people coming from to get on that plane? Like, are they from Arizona, and they're like, you just never know who's around you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh. Okay. So we'll see. This need not be the only thing we talk about. As you say, John, that was just something that you've noticed, the skepticism about vaccines. And
mm-hmm.
Ooh, can I make one more comment before we move on?
As many as you want.
You were shaking your head no. I was like, all right, when it's time, it's time. But I actually do know that metric. It doesn't exist, or from my understanding, I don't know that a metric exists of knowing how many people have had it in the last 2 weeks. But a similar that metric does exist for mask hesitancy. So I don't remember where I saw it, but somebody pulled up a map of how out of 5, each state got a color. If you interact with 5 random people, how many in each state can you expect to be wearing a mask? So if it was all 5, it was one color. If you can only expect 1 out of 5 to be wearing a mask, it was another color. And that was a really interesting that I saw. So that metric does exist.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool.
Okay. Well, we'll see what happens. It's interesting that the president has swung back into sort of the commander-in-chief of the war effort now. He's had a couple of, I think today was the 2nd, or maybe it's the 3rd of his being back in the daily briefings. So that might politicize it just a little more, although it's pretty.
Out of curiosity, was he wearing masks?
He was not.
Okay.
Yeah. It does seem like he changed his tune in the past couple days about, how long we expect it to be around. Will things get better before they get worse?
Yeah.
Definitely changing.
Well, today was a little rosier than yesterday. Yesterday seemed kind of frank, and today seemed kind of skate over it, pretty rosy. Seems to be, yep.
Are you talking the briefing or the numbers?
The briefing. The president's own language is all I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that the pandemic has become politicized on multiple fronts, but I think vaccines, you brought this up earlier, John, I think they already are politicized in a lot of ways. And they went over it in, it was a daily episode, it was the one I listened to today. They went over the fact that there were people who had gotten vaccines their whole life and who were super skeptical of this one, specifically because of how little they trusted Trump and how he was overseeing this process.
That's an angle I hadn't heard yet.
Yeah.
It entered my head today when he talked about whenever a politician tells you how fast progress is being made in the development, right, and how good it looks, right, for this. I forget the name of the pharmaceutical company with whom we just made a 100 million dose commitment, which is followed by another 500 million somehow. He did, according to the president in today's briefing. I don't know whether that other 500 million was set aside for the U.S. I mean, there was just Those were the two numbers he used, 100 million. And
We don't even have that many people here.
we don't, but that doesn't mean that the U.S. wouldn't, for example, want to stockpile or wouldn't
export.
Use them in other places for other ongoing.
Yeah.
But anyway, whenever a politician tells you how fast things are progressing, any politician, honestly, you wouldn't necessarily, frankly, why on earth would politicians be telling us that at all? You might think it'd be better if they didn't, because they generally don't know. They're not qualified to judge for the most part.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll see more of it, I'm sure. More rosy projections, more political encouragement at some point to take it or not take it. We've seen that happen before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how the narrative shifts as we get closer and closer to the election. Like, it is an election year, which I forget quite often. But yeah, is it like, I wonder with, the president's change in tune the past few days, if they're just like trying different things out to see how people respond, which I'm sure they are. I mean, I'm sure they're always doing things like that. Everybody in politics on both sides, but what's the
I
narrative?
think the other piece of the puzzle is in 4 months, we're going to be, well, how far away is November? July, August, September, October. I counted right, 4 months. In 4 months, we're going to be 4 months deeper into lockdown, which means 4 more months that people are going to be upset about being in lockdown, and their opinions on whether we should be shut down to the extent that we are right now or we shouldn't are going to either change given new evidence or get even more split by seeing people thinking otherwise, and also will be over the at least first benchmark of school decisions of like, our kids going back right at the time. So I think in the summer, there's obviously still decisions are being made now, but like they're largely decisions for later. By November, we'll have a lot more kind of fodder that will be fueling people in either direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, aren't the $600 unemployment benefits running out soon?
Mm-hmm.
Last week of July. That impacts me personally. I was laid off from my job, so I have that now, and that runs out last week of July.
Yeah. That's going to be a big deal, I think.
It's under discussion now as to whether it's going to be renewed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have any, I haven't paid too much attention to that specifically. Before, a while back, it seemed like it definitely wasn't going to happen, so I didn't look too much into it. Is there new information coming out? I heard something about another round of stimulus checks to everybody, but I hadn't heard any discussion about extending the 600 or something like it.
Mm.
I heard something about they were thinking about kind of a larger plan, maybe another stimulus check plan, but the reality is they are not going to come to any sort of agreement on that anytime soon. So they might do another like more months with this extra 600 just as a stopgap or something.
Does that cost less or more? Probably less.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
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 So JP, did you come loaded with anything on your mind?
I guess I just keep, not in particular. I think I've certainly been thinking about what's going on in Portland. And just the story there. it's hard to really know what's going on. And like what is, I guess, what's the deal? Like, what's the deal with these federal agents that people are all up in arms about? And how big of a deal is that? And does what those people do, is what the federal agents doing there like actually good, or is it bad? And because I think it's being construed as just really bad by the New York Times, which is mostly what I read. But and then how violent are the protests there? It's just I don't know. I was thinking about going and checking it out myself when I get home in a couple weeks. Because I'm flying back into Portland and I could stay somewhere. It might be interesting to just go see myself. I might stay a night in Portland and go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what you guys have read about that, or what your thoughts are on the situation in Portland.
Yeah, I get, basically that's why it's so interesting, is that I have zero sense. I know the protests have been going on for like a super long time.
55 days or something.
Don't know exactly how violent or destructive they've been, but it is certainly my assumption that a place like the New York Times would not have a lot of interest in reporting that number if it was very high, if they were very destructive. So, I mean, that doesn't make it true, and that doesn't mean that federal officers should, I don't know. It seems like there should have been like a notification or something before federal officers were deployed. I don't know if I ever heard about that. It definitely seems, at the very least, that should have happened. And yeah, unmarked cars certainly seems super sketchy. But I've heard one theory that basically what the federal officers are doing is they have video evidence of all of these protesters that have committed crimes just through cameras and street cameras and stuff. And so what they might do one night is go out in a car and pick up some of the protesters that they have this evidence of. I have no clue if that's true or not, but that's one motivation I've heard for the federal officers. So,
an interesting implication of the unmarked cars that I have heard is that if you are pulled into an unmarked car, which it seems like that is something that is being used, whether it's for people that they already like have video evidence of or not. I don't know all the specifics there, but if you are being kidnapped, you have, just like by anybody, you have a right to fight back. But if you are being picked up by a federal officer in an unmarked car, you do not have the right to fight back. It's resisting arrest. And there's some lawsuits trying to get that practice pushed out because people who are being picked up wouldn't know the difference because it's an unmarked car, and people and the federal officers generally are not wearing insignia. So the idea that you wouldn't know whether you're being kidnapped or picked up by a federal officer muddies those waters.
So yeah, I mean, it'd certainly be super important at the very least for them to identify themselves verbally, I guess. But at least in all the pictures I've seen, they do have a police patch at the center of their chest. But when that's not gear people typically associate with the police. So it's certainly not obvious at first glance that they're police in the same way that other police are. But my impression from the pictures I've seen, though, is that they do have police insignia or patch on their chest generally. I haven't seen a ton of pictures, but.
What do you think, Uncle Tom?
Let's see. I've got a little feedback loop running in my head, and it's telling me how much do you really know about this, and how much of the way you really feel about it is based upon what you actually know versus versus not. So with that caveat, that's what's slowing me down.
It's an important slowdown.
Yeah. Particularly when it really pisses me off, which it does, right? So just to come right out there and say it does. I mean, that's sort of the way I feel about it. Why? On a couple different measures, at a couple different levels, it does. One is right down at the on the street level. Seems to me that just legal rights are harder to enforce in an environment where you just don't know. It's not like you can go down to the precinct, right, and find out what happened to the person who was just picked up, right, by people you know who they are. So where are they? This person they just snatched. They snatched my brother, let's suppose, out of a line, and I'm trying to find him, and I'm trying to enforce his legal rights. I want to get an attorney. I want a writ of habeas corpus. I want, etc. Where do I go? I mean, there's a reason that we identify who we are, where we are, etc. And it seems to me that it seems to me that this is intentionally obfuscated, as it was in DC before Portland, right? So they sent folks into DC also. You have to be careful believing what you see these days when what you see is digital. I have seen a picture of the Lincoln Memorial absolutely littered with graffiti, for example. That was a false picture. That was a faux digital image, which got a lot of people up in arms. It took me almost no time at all to trace down that was false. And I have to admit, I didn't do the same search for a picture I saw with all of these, the Lincoln Memorial steps covered with folks similarly dressed. And at the time, that didn't produce a good feeling for me. In part, that's because I've read Plato's Republic, and I've read Plato's reflections on the soul of a tyrant and on the practices that tyrants typically follow, and that is that they raise a foreign army against their own people, and they bypass the normal agencies of force, and they bring in their very own. And they generally do that under cover of night, under secrecy, and they enforce their will in that way. And that's what it struck me. That's what reverberated in my mind when I saw these earlier than Portland, these pictures of only semi-uniformed individuals with weapons, which at the time seemed to me, I filed it at the time under, look, how is that different than, say, sending the Marines in, which, of course, that question came up at that time in DC, and there was a large backlash against it. And my question is, how is this any different than sending, if you send in federal troops, does it matter where you get them? It does matter in some regards, certainly. If you send in the Marines, you're sending in this enormously well-equipped fighting force that is not subtle, right, in its methods. It doesn't have a policing function. I shouldn't say that because we know that there is a policing function, but it's inward function. We actually know somebody who's in a policing function in the Marines, or has been, but that is inward-looking policing function, not outward looking, right? Policing function. And the Marines are generally not sophisticated in that way, not trained in that way. So I wouldn't say it wouldn't matter at all who you bring in, but it seems to me it's still federal use of force in a state matter. And now I'm shifting into area number 2. So how would I feel on the ground is one thought, but then how do I feel as a citizen of a state, thinking about limited constitutional rule and limited government? And what would the president's answer to this question be? I've asked myself. Look, the coronavirus has taken 140,000 deaths, right, in the United States in a matter of months. And yet we leave to the governors because we don't want to overreach what federal policy ought to be. What health policy ought to be. We leave to the governors what health policy ought to be in an area where there's an enormous risk to human life. And yet, how many people have died in Portland? Or how many people have died nationally? Now, unless you can always, how many people have died nationally as a result of anything that's changed in the last number of months? Right? You could say, well, how many people die of gun violence, and the cities aren't doing a good job, and that's the kind of rhetoric that gets thrown in here, right? And I could imagine a debate about that, but we've had no debate about that. We've simply had federal intervention in a way which looks like it's politically motivated, politically timed. We've had it with no national debate, and we've had it over the objection of governors in these states. And it seems to me to be utter constitutional hypocrisy. And it, as I said, pisses me off. I mean, that's sort of my reaction to it, my gut visceral reaction. But I know I don't know enough about it. And that's the problem here, is that nobody seems to know enough about it. Maybe I should know more of what's available to know, but.
Yeah, I certainly don't think they should have been deployed over the objections of the governor. I thought the same thing about the National Guard too. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't know how they're actually acting there. People have said they're snatching people off the street. Is that really what they're mostly doing? The president says they're there, or whoever is saying they're there to like protect federal property. Which if that's exclusively what they were doing, I guess I might not have the hugest problem with that. But yeah, it does seem like I've heard that they're snatching people off the streets in unmarked vans, and the governor doesn't even want them there. So it is hard to really get behind it in any sense, I guess.
Yeah, but what's happening to the people getting snatched? Right, like
I don't think it's super serious.
It'll be very interesting to hear, like, are they just getting released right away? Like, who are these people getting taken, and what happens to them? Right, that's something I don't know, because it's like, it seems like something you could get hysterical about.
Yeah.
When really, I mean, maybe they're just getting picked up and processed and released right away. Like, where are these people ending up?
That is one.
Just sort of appearance of hypocrisy and authoritarianism of it all, but it seems like something that could be. It looks really bad, I think. But what's the end result? And I haven't read anything. Like, I haven't heard. Or I haven't seen like an editorial on the New York Times, like, I was taken by an unmarked police vehicle. This is my story.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you guys have seen something like that, but
I did.
I saw something like that, and that's what I'm looking for.
But
Sorry.
suppose they were treated just wonderfully. Suppose they were treated in really good order.
Yeah.
And hard to imagine that, frankly, in a system that was set up quickly. But nonetheless, imagine they were. What are your thoughts about the question of whether they have a right to do that, whether they have a right to step over the judgments of local officials? Lots of layers of local officials. I don't know how many layers because I don't know the details of the government, but I would think as many as 3, right? Where there might be, I don't know who actually has got, I mean, generally there's a local, there's county, and there's state, right? Everywhere I've ever been, and there's level of enforcement at all those levels.
Yeah.
And there are people whose call it is, right? And are any of those people reaching out for help for the federal government? Not that I know of at this time, not in Portland.
Yeah. So I guess when would it be okay for the federal government to do something like that, to overstep Never's your answer. I mean, I think it's possible for both local, county, and state levels of government to fail at their jobs. And for the federal,
I do too. It's possible for them to fail at their jobs, but when is it right for the state? When is it right for the federal government, the state in that sense, right? At the highest level, to come in and decide how these people ought to deal with their crime difficulties.
Yeah. I mean,
if they're bringing in foreign troops, smuggling in foreign troops, that I could imagine being a different story, right? That's a national defense issue.
Yeah.
But I don't like the way they're enforcing the law locally. Therefore, I'm going to act precipitously, right? There's no conversation.
Yeah.
There was no conversation.
Well, I think, let's see, I totally agree with you, and I'm playing the devil's advocate.
Good.
So just putting
we should have.
Given our conversation the other night, this is me declaring my intentions here.
Yes.
So I don't know that it's true that there has been no discussion. I think that there have been lots of warnings from the federal government about you guys need to get the situation under control. And
that's not discussion. Threats, unjustified threats.
True.
Where it's none of your business.
Well,
right?
I think, but
not a discussion.
It's not necessarily none of the government's business.
That's what I was questioning. I'm thinking it is, and unless there are constitutionally protected rights, and it's generally not the executive branch's role to inflict enforcement over other enforcement agencies. Normally, that would be a matter you would think there'd be a matter for the court.
Yeah.
So if there is destruction of federal property going on, and the local, county, and state authorities are failing to enforce their laws, because they just agree, it doesn't really matter what their decision, like why it is. I mean, maybe they agree with what the protesters are protesting for in general, and it's just some violence on the side. But I think once the law is being broken consistently and not being enforced well enough at every level in the judgment of the federal government, where the federal government has interest, which I guess the loophole here would be protecting federal property, which is a thing. And
so then the federal government gets to do something about it after 50 days of failure to enforce laws.
On what grounds? If I don't like the way they're protecting my property, do I get to arrest people in unmarked cars, take people off the streets because I have property there and I don't like what they're doing in their level of protection? I'm taking an extreme, ridiculous case. The point is plainly not there. I don't have that right.
Yeah.
And where does the federal government's right come from?
Well, I think
if that matter.
I mean the federal right is at the highest. I mean, the buck basically stops at the federal government. Like, if the federal government won't do anything about it, then nothing will be done.
Sounds to me like you disagree with the claim that that all other rights are reserved for the states, other than, I forget the precise language, but I thought that's a constitutional language, right? Is that the federal government, their rights are specified, their rights and duties are specified, and all other rights are explicitly reserved for the states.
That might be true, but it's not obvious to me that what we're talking about falls outside of the
states.
It's not obvious to me what we're talking about falls outside that limited range.
So then it has to be constitutionally, there has to be a constitutional grounds for that federal override, and it presumably can't be that they don't like the speed at which enforcement, right, is taking place with respect to their federal properties. I mean, it'd be one thing if what they did was put somebody inside federal, I mean, they can certainly keep people from coming in, and presumably maybe they could put people around it. And then you could imagine, right? You could imagine that. But rounding up people and taking them into custody, supplanting the civil legal procedures of all those lower levels, seems to me that's precisely unconstitutional. And it seems to me, if this were done in another sort of context, everybody would see that.
Yeah.
But I'm not an expert, so I'm over my head here. But
I mean, what you're saying makes sense to me, obviously. I wonder what the rights are. I wonder what leeway the isn't it the Department of Homeland Security? I think that when we're talking about federal agents, that's who we're talking about, Homeland Security.
I have that impression.
And I wonder what falls under their jurisdiction, how much freedom they actually have. And maybe we'll find out that what they're doing is actually unconstitutional and against the law. But this seems like one of those things where the law actually permits the behavior we're seeing, but it's just manifestly reprehensible. Maybe not.
I don't see it. I don't see how the law permits it. I think they get away with it. They'd get away with sending in the troops. They'd get away with sending in an Apache helicopter over the streets of DC. I may have my make and model wrong. They'd get away with it, but it doesn't follow that it's legal. It's just who can stop it.
Yeah.
What do you think, Rach? You look like you're busy researching.
I was. What I'm chewing on right this second is I'm wondering about, I similarly am skeptical that there's a good, solid legal grounding for them circumvent, for federal agents, for the federal government, circumventing local and state established police systems. But what I am thinking about is if there's a convincing enough argument that could be made to muddy the water so further more than just can they get away with it because there's not going to be a like insurmountable challenge, but is there enough that they can try and hang their choice to do so on, like JP, you were saying about protecting federal property. I also think the existence of the violence in the area, I feel like there could be a constitutional protection there, trying to help protect people's like physical safety. I am skeptical that it's like super solid, but I fear that there would be enough muddy-ish grounding that they not only get away with it because they can't be challenged, but also get away with it because there's loose underpinnings that muddy the water.
Yeah. Yep.
But I also, the other thing that I was kind of thinking about at the beginning is the idea that the enumerated powers that the federal government has, and then everything else is left to the states. There are certainly some instances that it seems to be of interest to the federal government to overstep the states. And definitely that's something like, it's not in there, but like I can think of examples of times that if a state was like acting so reprehensibly, it would be important to try and address that situation. But the kind of catch-22 there is what I personally find reprehensible is different than what other people might find reprehensible. So that's kind of why it's set up in the way that it is.
Yep.
I don't, there's not really a question there, just kind of what was kicking around in my head as you all were talking. And I think each of you did a good job of addressing those kinds of things, but those are kind of the overarching themes that were kicking around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing that I read was that the violence was on, or not the violence, the protests and I guess whatever amount of violence that went along with that were on a pretty serious downward trend before people got sent there, and then it's spiked up hugely again. But so an interesting question is, how convinced am I that the president did this almost exclusively for political gain? To basically show himself as the law and order president who's trying to stop the unruliness of the protests. I certainly think it's not a bad interpretation. I don't know if I'm 100% convinced, but if it is the case, I think it's certainly even more, it makes the whole thing even more concerning.
Where I'm coming from, I am pretty convinced by that argument. So if somebody has a good they've thought about this from another perspective, I would actively be interested in hearing that challenged.
Yeah.
I guess it might be something that he would want to do even if it wasn't election time. I don't know if that's actually a counter argument, but
isn't it always election time?
I guess.
It's always election time.
I mean,
True.
That's always true at presidential politics. It's never been more so than in the Trump era. I mean,
Yeah.
First thing he did practically when he got into office was, if I forget the details, right? But he filed for re-election and got his campaign organized quite early. I don't know it either because I recall it dimly from a news.
I recall that as well.
Yeah. I do think here's an argument to the contrary, Rachel, a little bit, and that is there is some wide latitude for how do I put this? There's a kind of urgency sometimes in the that's appropriate to the executive branch that is not quite the same level of urgency, say in Congress, the legislative, or even the judiciary. Someone has got to take a case to the judiciary. But you can't wait to the fire. You don't go to court or pass laws to put the fire out, right? Or to defend against an assault. Or there are some kinds of things that have to be acted on quickly, and those things are generally the province of the executive branch. And so there's a natural grace period, an atmosphere of grace, right? Or something like that. That's, it seems to me, why you go to court pretty quickly, right? You can try to stop them in court, but they don't have to wait for the courts to act, right? Something like that. So you might still say period of time, right? People did go to court, and if they think this situation is really serious, they can make that plea. They can ask for a stay, for an injunction, etc. An injunction's the word I think I'm looking for here. They can ask for expedited action, etc. So they have some remedies, but we might still be. We're not months into this. We're a little bit of time into it, and so maybe the president gets some legal latitude. So maybe we shouldn't judge so quickly that it's political. Are we together still? I think we are. Yeah. Maybe we should not judge so quickly that it's political, because they need to take action in the executive branch quickly. And we're not in their shoes, and the system is set up to allow them, because we're not in their shoes and because of the urgency of the situation, right? There's review, but it lags behind. It doesn't lead. Mm-hmm.
I think something that's a great point, and I think that kind of goes back to the whole idea of like the reason for doing something and the legal justification that may find its way in court can sometimes they're the same, one and the same, but sometimes they can kind of diverge a little bit. That's what that makes me think of. But I'm losing my train of thought. It'll come back. It always does.
Yeah, I get it. Right.
It's back. It's back. The thing I'm thinking about is if this and kind of open if anybody wants to take this, do we think that this sort of response would have happened if the initial protests were about something less politically divergent from the president's current platform?
Sure. What if a Charlottesville protests had taken place and Obama had sent in troops, right? How would we look at it then? I'm mixing times, obviously. I'm
sure.
Fictitiously.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think when that happened, I think you would have had the Second Amendment crowd way up in arms, and they would have said, this is exactly why we have a Second Amendment, right? To protect from federal overreach of exactly this sort.
And the challenging piece of the puzzle there is I also, like, this is me checking my own biases, even if the actions were similar, I personally think that I have more sympathy for people getting picked up in vans now than I would if it happened at a white nationalist rally. While like in my head, I know that like I don't want that to be happening any of the time, but my sympathies go one way more than they do the other, unfortunately.
Yeah, but seems to me it would be naked federal aggression, right? In spite of what the governors were asking, right? Were a liberal administration to move in and say, sorry, all you levels, right? You're just not doing the right job here, right? Now there's not federal property in perhaps in at the university of which, I forget which university it was, Charlottesville, but you could imagine it being, a rally in a city where there is federal property and federal property being seen like sort of a pretext for doing what you want to do and taking aim at what you think the state is failing to take aim at, and thus trouncing all over the state's ability to govern itself in that regard. I think I wouldn't have had a lot of sympathy, I don't think, for Obama on Second Amendment grounds, or any president like him, and nor do I now for Trump.
Yeah, I am semi-sympathetic to the argument that if they were going there specifically just defensively to defend federal buildings and like not even go out at all, but just like to defend them from some stuff, I think that could make sense to me. But the going out and picking up people makes absolutely no sense to me. I think that could potentially, I'm super against the idea of the federal government sending in troops or anything basically that the mayors and governors don't want. But I think I could still be semi-sympathetic to that argument that they have the right essentially to just protect federal property and not do anything else.
But what if what if it goes further, John? And what if?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, it obviously does go further. That's the problem. But
from that, no. What I mean is, let me take the argument further. I think you maybe have granted too much there, because once you grant that they can come in and have a show of force, a defensive show of force, what keeps them from saying, "Hey, wait a minute, our troops would be in jeopardy," right? And there's just sufficient evidence that they would be in jeopardy, and that you don't have the capacity or won't have the capacity to protect them because of your longstanding enforcement policies about riotous behavior. And so we not only have the right to send in troops to protect the federal house, the federal property, but we have the right to have them not be shot at. Right, and in a riotous environment, where other people won't clean it up, we have to.
So these are not troops, first of all, and they are not being shot at. And if they were being shot at, it would be a very different situation. I mean,
you have to wait till the bullets fly. Isn't if they're throwing rocks and bottles, and
I mean, we have very strict rules of engagement for the military. I think they're even less strict, or, well, I don't know. I don't want to exactly know how that works, but I've heard that like the police have less strict rules of engagement than the military do. But yeah, I mean, in a situation where federal officers were sent to protect a building and then they were getting shot at, I mean, I guess they would have the right to protect themselves. Rocks are not bullets, so that's very different, it seems. And I think the police have shown, they get rocks thrown at them all the time, and sometimes they've acted inappropriately and run over protests, but I mean, sometimes they're able to just stand there and, I don't know exactly how it always goes, but do the right thing or back out or however it goes.
You make a good case.
Yeah. So I think the legality of it would have to be discussed more. Because in general, I'm super against the federal government overriding the will of states. But.
Yeah.
I guess the last thing is, if I was thinking about how crazy it would be for Trump to do, or not, maybe not crazy in his case, but how crazy it would be for a president to do something like this in order to gain votes in an election or to help his election chances. It might almost be naive to be surprised by that, particularly in reference to that Ken Burns documentary that on the Vietnam War, where, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the impression I was left from that film was that there were multiple presidents who made the decision, even though they knew it was a losing war, they made the decision to stay largely because they would lose the next election if they did so.
Yeah.
So
there was always political motivation for what they were doing, and they had recordings of each of the presidents talking about it.
yeah.
The election was different. Like Nixon was less he kept doing more in Vietnam and told the public he was doing less because the public wanted him out of Vietnam. And so his situation was kind of the opposite of the previous presidents, if I recall. But it was true. Yeah. It was true before then.
Yeah.
Even with Nixon, it might have been, it might have cost him his own base, or it might have cost him the election, even though people wanted him to withdraw. The fact that he withdrew was, and leading the U.S. with tail between its legs, or seeming to, could have been, you know what I mean? People might want you out, but they also are going to blame you when you lose.
Mm-hmm.
Politics is fickle.
Yeah. But super good documentary.
No, that's right.
And,
as you all know from your Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young musical history, if not from anything else, we actually lost lives in those protests, right? In the whole protests over that whole era against government. There was question there too about government overreach. Not only government overreach overseas, but government overreach at home. 4 dead in Ohio, right? At Kent State. It's Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song Ohio commemorates them. And there were others.
Yeah, that documentary is actually super interesting. And it's actually an interesting context to put like today's political disagreements in, because a lot of people were super aggressive and polarized back then too. And I read something interesting today about how Donald Trump was basically trying to artificially recreate the hard hat movement, I think it was, where there was peaceful protesters all the time protesting in the streets. And then there was a group of largely construction workers that were super pro-war and like pro-support the troops. And they would get into like big scuffles with each other on the street. And I read that, Trump was basically trying to recreate that political feeling artificially using troops instead of having a show of support from Americans who actually cared enough.
Do you know where that article was?
I do not.
Or anything? We would like to read that.
Yeah, I'll I'll shoot it to you if I can find it though.
I can also just do some Googling. The internet is magical. It'll pop up.
Rub the genie.
I think I read the terms performative fascism in the same article, so that was another interesting word.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I've seen those words used a little more broadly in non-that article contexts. So,
yeah,
but might get you closer.
I think it was actually an Atlantic article, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay, I just found one from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, performative fascism and hard hat might pull it up. That's
Oh wow! So it looks like this is a topic a lot of people have taken on. Who did I just say? Wall Street Journal has one. New York Times has one. New York Daily News has one. All in the last month. I guess 2 weeks it would be.
Okay. Good. Well, send some around. If you see something that's particularly good, if you find just the right article there, that'd be great to read. Well, we're 90 minutes into this, and we try to let people live their lives in other ways than this. So maybe we should tonight. So this is good. Rachel, it was delightful to have you with us.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah, it was great, Rachel. Glad you were able to come.
Yeah. If you want to come back again, Rachel, please do. That same link is the link that works meeting after meeting at 7 o'clock. If you wanted to come back another time, you'd be welcome to take a peek.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7, right?
That's right.
This coming week, that could be hard, but I'll let you know, Uncle Tom.
Sure. Well, you know we're here, and if you'd be welcome to pop in.
Sweet. Thank you.
You bet. Okay. JP, John, I'll probably see you at something one of these days. I don't know when.
Yeah.
Should be soon.
All right. And we're reading that article for Friday. Is that right? Or are we talking about something else Friday?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, let's read it because it's easy and have it in the back of our minds, and how much time we spend talking about it might be up to you guys, I'd say.
Okay.
Because but I think we could probably resume the idea of, we might start again with, and put a little more flesh on the idea of a tradition concept inventory. There, Rachel, we were talking about the idea of how do you measure confrontations between traditions if you can't tell who's an adult, so to speak, who's got mastery of a tradition. Mastery is maybe too strong, but is in contact with what the tradition is. And one way to do that is to put together a concept inventory, and that's done in physics with regard to Newtonian mechanics. Why couldn't it be done, or could we explore doing it for a tradition?
Totally. Would you send me that article?
I'd send you an article if it existed.
No, I mean the one you guys are going to read for Friday.
Oh yeah, sure I will. You bet. It's an old paper that looks forward to from 25. How many years ago was it? Yeah, 24 years ago. It looks forward to the same sort of conversation we're having now, although from a distance. Yep.
Great.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks. It's been great to spend some time. Good to see you.
Great to see you guys.
Yeah. You as well. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you, Rach.